In this video, you're going to learn about the neuroscience of overthinking. We'll journey deep into the mechanisms of your mind, understanding how thought patterns emerge, how they gain traction, and how, when left unchecked, they spiral. From the first spark of worry to the looping patterns of rumination, from the brain's emotional alarm systems to its cognitive steering wheel, we'll uncover the intricate design that makes overthinking not just a habit, but a neurological cascade. We'll begin with what you already know, intimately, the experience of lying in bed while your brain refuses to rest. Then we'll explore what lies beneath, the networks, the loops, the circuits, and more importantly, how they can be soothed. So relax, take a deep breath, allow your body to soften, and let your mind lean into this quiet unfolding. You see, the night invites reflection. It withdraws the noise of the day, and in that silence, your internal world emerges. But for many, this isn't peaceful. It's when the mind starts to race. That's not a flaw in your personality. It's a feature of how your brain evolved. Your mind is wired to anticipate, evaluate, and reprocess. This was once a survival advantage, but in modern life, with fewer immediate threats and more abstract stressors, this same mechanism can become overwhelming. The phenomenon of overthinking begins as attention. You notice something, an event, a possibility, a memory, and your brain flags it as important. That flag is emotional arousal, often subtle, sometimes sharp. It tells your brain, this matters, stay alert. And here's where the loop begins. When a thought carries emotional weight, your brain tags it with salience. It becomes more vivid, more present. That's the job of your salience network, to decide what deserves your attention. But if that network is overstimulated by stress, fatigue, or emotion, it becomes overactive, flagging too much, too often. Then enters the default mode network, the system that engages when you're not focused on a task. It handles internal reflection, imagination, and self-referential thinking. It's the part of the brain responsible for replaying conversations, simulating outcomes, and reviewing the past. This is useful until it's not. When your salience network says this is important, and your default mode network is allowed to run unchecked, the mind begins to loop. It revisits the same scenarios. It imagines more permutations, and it rarely reaches a conclusion. Why? Because another part of your brain, the executive control network, is quiet. This network, which includes the prefrontal cortex, helps regulate attention, suppress distractions, and make decisions. But when emotional arousal is high, this system is weakened. It's like trying to steer a ship while the waves grow wild. So at night, when your body slows down, your emotional brain may remain alert. Perhaps you had a disagreement earlier, or a moment of uncertainty about the future. These emotional cues awaken the salience network. The default mode kicks in, and the executive control, exhausted from a full day, lets go of the wheel. What results is a cascade of thoughts fueled by emotion and unregulated by focus. This isn't a sign of personal weakness. It's neurobiology. And here's where awareness begins to help. Understanding that overthinking is not simply thinking too much, but a misalignment between three systems in your brain can bring immense relief. You are not broken. You are simply caught in a pattern, one that the brain falls into when its circuits become unbalanced. And once you see the pattern, you can begin to change it. You might start by noticing when thoughts grow louder. Is there an emotional spark behind them? A fear, a regret? Often, the loop is driven not by the thought itself, but by what it represents. A need for control, a desire for safety, a longing to undo something already done. By identifying the emotion, you start to loosen the thought's grip. But even before that, simply knowing that your brain is doing what it evolved to do, trying to protect you, can soften the frustration. Overthinking is not an enemy, it's a misguided friend. And sleep, the very thing that feels impossible when the thoughts arrive, is also the thing that helps reset these circuits. Sleep restores executive function. It calms emotional reactivity. It recalibrates your networks. So if you found yourself stuck in loops, night after night, don't judge yourself. You are not alone, and you're not powerless. This video is your gentle guide through the neural landscape of overthinking, not to fight it, not to suppress it, but to understand it deeply, and in that understanding, begin to quiet it. Because while your thoughts feel loud right now, the systems behind them can be softened. Your brain, like the body, seeks balance, and with a bit of awareness, you can help it find that balance again. But before we dive into the deeper structures that generate your thoughts, we need to first understand how a thought is born. A thought may feel like a flash, sudden, intangible, fleeting, but behind that flicker is a whole cascade of brain activity, and understanding how a thought is born gives you power because it reveals the mechanics behind the spirals. It takes what feels personal and heavy and shows you the system, neural, elegant, and open to change. A thought begins before you even notice it. It arises at the intersection of sensation, emotion, and memory. Imagine a small ripple in a vast ocean. That ripple could be triggered by a sound, a scent, a word, or even the absence of stimulation. Something as subtle as a shift in temperature, or the tightening in your chest when you recall a conversation. That trigger activates emotional and physiological circuits, and here's where the brain steps in to make sense of the signal. The process starts with detection. Your brain is constantly scanning, internally and externally, for signals that might require attention. This could be hunger, discomfort, or a passing sense of dread. That signal is picked up by networks like the amygdala and insula, key parts of the salience network. They tag the signal as important. They don't assign meaning, only urgency. Then another system comes online, the default mode network. This network, often active during rest or mind wandering, takes that signal and begins to weave it into a narrative. Your memory, your personal history, your beliefs, they all contribute to this construction. If the signal is emotional, the brain wants to understand why, and so a thought is born, often not just one, but a cluster, each linked by association. Let's say you feel a tension in your chest. The salience network lights up, tagging it as meaningful. The default mode network recalls a recent argument. Then it remembers a similar moment from childhood. Then it imagines what could happen next. Suddenly, you're no longer sensing a single moment. You're riding a wave of intertwined memories and imagined futures. All of this happens in milliseconds. At the core, a thought is the brain's attempt to organize incoming signals, both internal sensations and external stimuli, into a coherent picture. It's how we make sense of the world. But when emotions are strong, the brain starts filling in more blanks than it needs to. It becomes overly vigilant, constantly creating new connections, many of them speculative or distorted. And this is where overthinking can begin. You're not just responding to what is. You're now reacting to what could be, what was, what might still happen. This endless weaving of meanings and scenarios becomes a loop. The more vivid or emotionally charged a thought, the more it reinforces itself. The brain, in a way, thinks this must matter since it keeps coming back. But this is not a flaw. It's a feature of how we evolved. Your brain's priority has always been survival, not peace. It evolved to anticipate danger, not to relax into stillness. Thoughts that seem uncomfortable, even obsessive, are your brain's ancient effort to protect you from mistakes, from rejection, from harm. Still, that protective system isn't always calibrated for modern life. In a world full of constant stimuli, abstract worries, and open-ended problems, your thought machinery can become overwhelmed. When there's no clear resolution, the loop persists. The signal is never satisfied. At this point, the executive control network is supposed to step in. This is your mental filter, the manager of your attention. It decides, is this worth continuing? Should we redirect? But if it's fatigued or inhibited by stress, it can't assert itself. The thought gains momentum. You may notice this, especially at night. During the day, distractions and tasks give your executive network purpose. It's engaged. But at night, that system begins to rest. Meanwhile, emotional signals still surge. Leftover tension, unresolved plans, memories stirred by stillness. Without strong regulation, the default mode runs wild. Thoughts emerge like mist over water, each one trailing a question, a memory, or a fear. The thought isn't the problem, it's the pattern. And patterns can be gently reshaped. When you understand how thoughts form, you begin to see how you might intervene, not by suppressing them, but by softening their charge. One approach is curiosity. When a thought arises, instead of judging it, ask, what signal might this thought be trying to process? Is there an emotion I haven't acknowledged, a decision I've avoided? By asking, you shift the brain's stance from reaction to observation. That simple shift recruits parts of your prefrontal cortex. It engages executive function, even lightly, and that, over time, can begin to restore balance. Another approach is to engage the body, because the brain doesn't operate in isolation. Many thoughts are born from physical signals: fatigue, hunger, tightness, shallow breath. By addressing these, the original signal may quiet down, reducing the need for thought to compensate. It helps too to know that not every thought deserves your attention. The brain produces thousands each day. Most are routine, some are creative, others are distortions, echoes of fear magnified by repetition. When you understand how a thought is constructed, you realize you can choose how much to engage with it, not by force, but by awareness. A single thought is a moment. A loop is a system. But even loops can be softened, rewired, and eventually stilled. And as we move forward, we'll step deeper into the structures that power these loops, not just the thoughts themselves, but the networks that light them up. Because while every thought has a shape, every overthinking pattern has a source, and that source can be seen, understood, and gradually calmed. Thoughts do not exist in a vacuum. They rise, often quietly, from emotional currents deep within the brain. And when those currents are turbulent, unprocessed feelings, unresolved fears, subtle anxieties, a thought becomes more than a passing idea. It becomes a carrier of weight, of urgency, of discomfort. This is how a single moment of worry can transform into obsession. To understand this, picture a river with many tributaries. One is emotion, another is sensation, another is memory. When they converge, they create a current strong enough to carry thoughts far downstream, sometimes to places you didn't intend to go. This is not random. It's the brain trying to process a signal, but when it lacks clarity or resolution, it loops again and again. It often begins with a feeling. Perhaps you sense that something's wrong. Nothing specific, just an unease, a sense of incompleteness. The brain, attuned to danger, quickly searches for a cause. What did I forget? Did I say something wrong? What if tomorrow doesn't go well? These questions don't resolve the feeling, they feed it. You see, your emotional brain, primarily the limbic system, is designed to detect threat before logic has time to intervene. And one of its key messengers is the amygdala, small, almond-shaped, deeply buried, but immensely powerful. The amygdala acts like an emotional fire alarm. When it senses danger, real or perceived, it signals urgency. This might not be a lion at your door. It could be a critical email, a silence from someone you care about, a look you misinterpreted. But to your amygdala, it's all the same. Pay attention, now. That alarm travels swiftly, and in doing so, it activates other networks. It tells your salience network, mark this as important. And the salience network does exactly that. It amplifies the signal. Suddenly, the thought becomes louder, more vivid. It's now a dominant feature in your mental landscape. But unlike an external fire, this alarm doesn't stop on its own. It persists, because the danger isn't clear, and there's no simple action to take. The result? Your default mode network, begins to replay every possible source of danger. It revisits conversations, reviews past decisions, simulates future catastrophes. It is trying in its own way to resolve the uncertainty, but in doing so, it deepens the loop. This is the seed of obsession. A single emotionally charged thought, repeated so often that it begins to shape your inner experience. And the more you engage with it, the more real it feels. That's because the brain learns through repetition. Each time a thought is replayed, the neural connections that carry it are strengthened. Like a path walked again and again, it becomes easier to follow and harder to leave. What began as emotion becomes cognition, and what was once a signal becomes a belief. I always mess things up. Nothing ever works out. They must be upset with me. These beliefs are not conclusions. They are thoughts frozen in motion, caught in loops of emotion and rehearsal. And because they carry emotional weight, they resist redirection. The prefrontal cortex, which governs reasoning and flexibility, struggles to assert itself when the amygdala is dominant. This is why you may know, logically, that a worry is irrational, but still feel powerless to stop it. Emotion overrides logic, and the thought persists. But not all repetitive thoughts are obsessions. Some are preoccupations, milder, less intrusive, but still persistent. These often take the form of what-if questions. What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if I fail? These thoughts are not senseless, they're protective. The brain is scanning for future danger, rehearsing possibilities in an attempt to prepare. The problem arises when preparation becomes paralysis, when the loop does not lead to insight, but to exhaustion, when thinking doesn't bring clarity, only noise. This is where understanding becomes essential. Obsessions tend to be intrusive, ego-dystonic, meaning they feel alien, unwanted, and distressing. They arrive uninvited and often bring shame or fear. Preoccupations, by contrast, feel more voluntary, though they too can become overwhelming. And then there are ruminations, self-referential thoughts, often tinged with regret, replaying past events with no resolution. Each of these has different emotional roots. Obsessions often stem from fear, preoccupations from uncertainty, ruminations from sadness or guilt, but all share a common feature. They arise when the emotional brain takes the lead and the thinking brain struggles to respond. Understanding this interplay helps you see that your thoughts are not enemies. They are messengers. Sometimes they speak in confusion, sometimes in pain, but always with purpose. The key is not to silence them, but to listen with discernment, to ask, what emotion is driving this, and is it something I can tend to rather than solve? Because often what the mind seeks is not resolution, but acknowledgement. The thought persists because the feeling beneath it has not been seen, not been felt, not been held with kindness. And here a shift begins. When you meet your thoughts not with resistance, but with curiosity, you start to change the pattern. When you name the emotion beneath them, the brain registers that the signal has been heard. The alarm softens, the loop begins to unwind. But for that to happen, the balance between your emotional and executive systems must be restored, and that begins not with force, but with gentle attention. Next, we'll enter the realm of the brain's three primary networks, and see how their balance or imbalance sets the stage for either peace or spirals. Inside your brain, three major networks work in constant coordination. They guide your attention, filter your emotions, and shape your inner voice. When these networks function in harmony, your thoughts move with fluidity. You can focus when needed, reflect when appropriate, and shift gears when the moment changes. But when their balance is lost, your mind becomes a maze, one that loops, stalls, and spirals. These three core systems are the salience network, the default mode network, and the executive control network. Together, they form a triad that governs most of your cognitive and emotional experience. Understanding how they interact is the key to understanding overthinking. Let's begin with the salience network. Think of it as your brain's spotlight operator. It constantly scans the environment, both inside and outside you, for anything that might be important. It decides what deserves your attention. It's the system that perks up when you hear your name in a crowded room, or feel a sudden flutter in your chest. The salience network includes regions like the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Its job is urgent, detect, prioritize, and signal. When something is tagged as emotionally relevant, whether it's a physical sensation, a memory, or a perceived threat, the salience network lights up. It nudges your other systems into action, either the default mode for internal reflection or the executive control network for external action and focus. Now meet the default mode network, or DMN. This is your introspective space. It activates when you're not focused on a task, when your mind drifts, reflects, or dreams. It's the home of self-referential thinking. It connects past with present, simulates the future, replays scenarios, and conjures what-ifs. The DMN includes areas like the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex. It's active during solitude, silence, and yes, when you're lying in bed at night, lost in thought. This network is deeply human. It enables imagination, empathy, creativity, but it also fuels rumination. When overstimulated or poorly regulated, it becomes the engine of overthinking. You revisit that awkward moment. You rehearse a conversation. You regret. You anticipate. The DMN becomes a mental hall of mirrors, each reflection echoing back more uncertainty. And then there is the executive control network. This is your brain's inner manager. It handles decision-making, planning, impulse control, and goal-directed behavior. When you need to solve a problem, resist a distraction, or stay on task, this network steps in. It's centered in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex. Strong and steady, it helps you sift through thoughts, choose what matters, and silence what doesn't. In a balanced brain, these three networks operate like a well-coordinated orchestra. The salience network cues in the relevant themes. The DMN reflects. The executive control network acts. They take turns. One steps forward, another retreats. Focus alternates with reflection. Emotion is processed, not magnified. But in overthinking, the balance tips. When the salience network is overactivated, often due to chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or emotional strain, it begins flagging too many signals as urgent. It becomes a hypervigilant gatekeeper. Every passing sensation, every minor worry, is treated as a threat. This triggers the default mode network, pulling you inward into self-referential loops. You start to analyze, reanalyze, simulate. But with the salience network still alarmed, the DMN doesn't settle. It spins. Meanwhile, the executive control network, the system that could quiet the storm, is often weakened. Emotional arousal diminishes its strength. Fatigue erodes its capacity. Without its moderating influence, the loops intensify. You think more, but resolve less. And here lies the core of overthinking: an overactive salience network, an unchecked default mode network, and an underpowered executive control system. This triad creates the perfect storm. But knowing this offers clarity and options. If the salience network is the fire alarm, your first step is not to ignore the noise, but to lower the emotional heat. Techniques that soothe the body, slow breathing, gentle movement, grounding, help quiet the salient signal. They tell the system you're safe. If the DMN is the inner narrator gone rogue, the answer is not silence, but guidance. Journaling, mindful observation, or structured reflection can redirect its energy. Rather than spinning in fear, it learns to explore with curiosity. And if the executive network is exhausted, rest is not a luxury, it's medicine. Sleep, deep focus breaks, and nourishing rhythms help restore its strength. Over time, it becomes your compass again, pointing you toward what matters and away from what doesn't. What's important to remember is that these networks are not fixed. They are plastic, responsive, and trainable. The brain learns through repetition, not just the repetition of thoughts, but of practices. Every time you calm your breath, every time you shift your focus with kindness, every time you choose rest over rumination, you're sending a signal back into this triad: balance is possible. And the more often that signal is sent, the more familiar that balance becomes. Now that you've met these three powerful networks, the next question is, what happens when they fall out of sync? How does attention break down? And how does that breakdown feed the spiral of overthinking? Attention, in its truest form, is the mind's spotlight. It illuminates what matters, allowing clarity to emerge from the flood of impressions that pass through your awareness. It lets you read, listen, decide, and rest. But when that spotlight begins to flicker, or worse, splits into scattered beams, you begin to lose your sense of stability. This is one of the hidden engines of overthinking, the breakdown of attention. Your ability to focus is not just about discipline or willpower. It's a dynamic interaction between brain systems, especially the three we've already explored. When those systems operate in harmony, attention flows smoothly. You can shift from task to thought, from worry to presence, without getting stuck. But when the system falters, attention becomes erratic. It jumps, it clings, it loops. Imagine attention like a thread that stitches your moment-to-moment experience together. It decides which thoughts to hold and which to release. It prioritizes what's urgent, what's neutral, what's calming. But attention, unlike a muscle, isn't just strengthened by use. It's nourished by rhythm, by moments of rest, by the ebb and flow of emotional energy, by the quiet ability to disengage. One of the first signs of imbalance in attention is something you've likely felt, that sense of being mentally stuck. You try to focus on the task at hand, but your mind keeps pulling you toward an unresolved worry. You return to that moment in a conversation, that future scenario you fear, that decision you're unsure of. No matter how often you shift your focus, a thought returns. This is not just distraction, it's a failure of set shifting. Set shifting is your brain's ability to move fluidly from one mental state to another. It's what lets you go from planning to relaxing, from reflecting to acting. It's managed by the executive control network, especially the prefrontal cortex. But when that network is fatigued or inhibited, your attention can't shift easily. It becomes rigid. It grabs hold of one thought and struggles to release it. This rigidity fuels overthinking, because once a thought becomes the center of attention, the brain begins to elaborate on it. It connects it to past fears, imagined outcomes, hidden insecurities. This is called elaborative encoding. The more attention a thought receives, the more complex and emotionally charged it becomes, and the harder it is to ignore. Meanwhile, the default mode network, your reflective system, is happy to take the stage. Without clear direction from the executive system, it begins to drift. It conjures not just one scenario, but many. It blends memory with imagination, fear with fact. And because the salience network is still active, emotionally charged thoughts are favored. Your attention becomes biased, drawn again and again to what feels urgent, even if it's unresolved or irrational. This explains why overthinking feels like a loss of control. Your mind isn't just busy, it's cycling through high emotion content without an anchor. And your attention, the one thing that could redirect the spiral, is caught in the current. But this is where insight can offer a shift. Attention, though it feels like a passive state, is trainable. It can be guided, strengthened, and even softened. The key is to stop trying to force it and instead start listening to it. When you notice your attention fixating on a particular thought, pause. Ask yourself gently, what does this thought want from me? Is there a signal I've missed, an emotion I haven't tended to? Often attention clings to what feels unresolved, not because it wants a solution, but because it hasn't been heard. Acknowledging the thought, without judgment, sends a powerful message to your brain. You are listening, and when the brain knows you're listening, It doesn't have to shout. Another practice is gentle redirection. This doesn't mean distraction, but intentional shifting. You might name something in the room. Focus on a sound. Feel the weight of your body on the bed. These anchors give attention a resting place. They remind the brain that not every thought needs rehearsal. Over time, practices like mindfulness, not the rigid kind, but the soft kind, help retrain your networks. They strengthen the executive system's ability to regulate. They reduce the salience network's alarm. They guide the default mode toward gentler reflections. And perhaps most importantly, they offer kindness. Because the breakdown of attention is not a personal flaw, it's a natural response to overload. When the mind is too full, attention fragments. When emotion is too loud, attention narrows. Understanding this helps you forgive yourself for the spirals, and in that forgiveness, the first threads of focus return. As we continue, we'll explore what happens when the default mode network, your inner narrator, begins to dominate, how it leads you not just into reflection, but into rumination, and how that quiet mental drift becomes the core rhythm of overthinking. The mind loves to wander. When you're not actively solving a problem or engaging with the world around you, your brain naturally drifts inward. It reflects, imagines, revisits, and replays. This is the territory of the default mode network, a system not of silence, but of storytelling. This inner narrator, seated within your default mode network, gives voice to your experiences. It constructs meaning from your past, envisions possibilities for your future, and fills the empty spaces between one task and the next. In moments of stillness, it becomes most active. It is where daydreams are born and memories are reassembled. But when unchecked, it is also where rumination takes root. Rumination is not just thinking. It is the mind's refusal to release a thought that no longer serves. It is the act of turning over the same scenario again and again, not to understand it more deeply, but because it carries unresolved emotion. It is often tethered to regret, to guilt, to perceived failure. And unlike problem-solving, rumination does not move forward. It circles, loops, expands, and then repeats. What makes rumination so potent is that it feels like you're doing something. You believe you are analyzing, preparing, fixing. But in truth, you are rehearsing pain, replaying the uncomfortable. The mind, caught in the grip of emotional arousal, keeps returning to what hurts, not to resolve it, but to make sense of why it hurts so much. This process is not just mental, it's neural. When the default mode network becomes dominant and emotional input from the salience network remains high, the brain begins to prioritize emotionally charged, self-referential content. It pulls from memory, often selectively. It chooses what confirms your fears. It highlights failure, neglects success. This is not pessimism, it's survival strategy. If you can spot the pain, maybe you can avoid it next time. But there's a cost. As rumination deepens, it consumes cognitive resources. Your ability to concentrate, to be present, to plan or rest diminishes. Even your capacity for joy can fade as the mind becomes preoccupied with imaginary threats or unresolved hurts. At night, this is especially visible. When your environment is quiet and your duties are paused, the default mode network activates. If your emotional load is heavy, if your heart carries sadness, fear, or shame, it seizes the moment. It opens the files. It reviews the evidence. And because there is no active executive oversight, no goal to solve or task to complete, the rumination flows unchecked. You may find yourself replaying a moment from years ago, not because it's relevant, but because the emotion still lives in your body, or you project into a future disaster, not because it's likely, but because the fear still seeks a voice. This is the mind, trying to metabolize emotion through thought. But thought alone cannot digest feeling. So what can you do? First, recognize the shape of rumination. Unlike reflection, which moves, rumination stays stuck. It reuses the same words. It clings to the same images. If you notice repetition without insight, you are likely in a ruminative loop. Second, name it, gently. This is rumination, not to judge, but to shine light on the process. Naming engages your prefrontal cortex. It invites your executive network back online. It reminds the system that you are present and capable of choosing again. Third, reconnect with the body, because rumination is fueled by emotion, and emotion lives in the body, grounding your awareness in physical sensation. A deep breath, the feel of your mattress, the sound of your breath helps reduce emotional arousal. It gives the salience network something tangible to anchor to. Fourth, offer your mind a task, not to suppress the rumination, but to redirect it. A soothing image, a calming sentence, a mantra, a memory of safety. The mind, when idle, will wander, but if it is guided with intention, it can soften. You're not forcing it out, you're giving it a more peaceful path. And finally, practice compassion, because rumination often arises not from weakness, but from woundedness. A part of you is trying to protect you, to warn you, to make sure you never hurt again. That part is often young, uncertain, and afraid. When you meet it with understanding instead of impatience, something softens. You don't need to battle your thoughts. You need to recognize when your inner narrator has gone too far into the past, or too far into imagined futures, and gently, steadily guide it home. The brain is plastic, its patterns are not fixed, and the default mode network, while persistent, can learn new rhythms through awareness, through care, through daily practice. As we continue, we'll explore how emotional arousal, especially the kind triggered by fear and uncertainty, can override your thinking brain entirely, intensifying the cycle of overthinking until thought itself feels overwhelming. Overthinking often feels like it comes from nowhere. One moment you're brushing your teeth, reading a message, lying in bed, and the next you're lost in thought, spinning scenarios, revisiting fears, anticipating mistakes. But these mental spirals rarely arise without reason. There is almost always a trigger, and that trigger is emotional arousal. At its core, overthinking is not a thinking problem. It's a feeling problem that manifests in thought. Your thoughts are messengers for something deeper, an unease, a restlessness, a fear that something has been missed or might go wrong. And when that emotional signal is strong enough, it pulls your attention away from the present, away from peace, and into loops. This emotional signal is delivered primarily by the salience network. When it senses something meaningful, whether it's a tightness in your chest, a shift in someone's tone, or a flicker of uncertainty, it activates. Its job is simple: alert the system, pay attention. That alert is not verbal, it's visceral. It arrives as tension, a racing heart, a subtle sense of dread, and before your conscious mind can assess it, the emotional circuits are already engaged. Sometimes the trigger is clear, an argument, a piece of news, a decision weighing on you, but often the triggers are subtle: accumulated stress, a poor night's sleep, hormonal shifts, an old memory resurfacing. Your salience network does not distinguish between physical and emotional threats. It responds to both, and when overwhelmed, it casts a wide net, flagging too many thoughts as urgent, too many sensations as suspicious. This emotional overactivation is a spark, and your default mode network, ever ready, catches it. It begins to explain the feeling by searching for a cause. Maybe they're upset with me. Maybe I failed to prepare. Maybe this means something bad is coming. The search is well-meaning. The brain wants to resolve the tension, but in the absence of a clear cause, it begins to fabricate one. It connects dots that don't belong together. It elaborates. It spirals. Here, the executive control network, your inner moderator, should ideally step in. It should evaluate the thought. Is this useful? Is this true? Is this the best use of our mental energy? But when emotional arousal is high, the prefrontal cortex becomes less active, the thinking brain quiets, the feeling brain takes over. What was once a fleeting concern becomes an ongoing mental narrative. This is why some thoughts feel sticky, why some worries refuse to fade. It's not the thought itself, it's the emotional tag attached to it. If the feeling is unresolved, the thought returns, hoping this time to bring closure. But closure doesn't come from repeating the same path. It comes from soothing the signal underneath. So what are the common triggers that ignite this process? One is uncertainty. The human brain craves predictability. When outcomes are unknown, whether in relationships, work, or health, the salience network heightens. It searches for control, and in doing so floods the mind with possible outcomes. Another is perceived failure. When your brain believes you've made a mistake or might be seen negatively, it activates threat detection. Thoughts flood in, trying to rewrite the past or prepare for future judgment. Loneliness can also be a powerful spark. Connection is a primary human need. In its absence, the brain may begin to scan for reasons, many of which become self-critical or catastrophizing. Even boredom plays a role. When the brain lacks stimulation, the default mode activates. If emotional residue is still present from earlier stress, the thoughts that arise will likely revolve around those themes. Importantly, physical discomfort, pain, hunger, hormonal imbalance, or exhaustion can heighten emotional sensitivity. When your body feels unsafe, your brain mirrors that sense with mental preoccupation. It's not always psychological, it's often biological. So how do you begin to soften these triggers? Start with awareness. Notice when a spiral begins. Ask gently, what might have sparked this? Not to suppress the thought, but to trace it to its emotional root, often naming the feeling. Anxiety, guilt, loneliness disempowers the thought. Then tend to the body. Overthinking is a full body experience. If the salience network is overactive, it means your nervous system is on high alert. So shift your focus from mind to body. Breathe, move slowly, stretch, drink water. These aren't just calming activities, they are physiological messages of safety. They tell your brain the threat has passed. If the trigger was a decision or unresolved conflict, allow space for structured reflection. Instead of looping, journal with prompts. Instead of rehearsing conversations in your mind, write them out. The brain seeks resolution, and sometimes giving it a structured outlet reduces the need for repetition. And when the trigger is unknown, when you simply wake into thought, offer yourself kindness. Not every loop has a name, not every fear has a story. Sometimes it is simply the echo of days or weeks of silent strain. When the source is invisible, the treatment is gentleness. You are not weak for overthinking. You are responsive, sensitive, deeply attuned. And while those traits can lead to spirals, they are also the foundation for deep reflection, empathy, and creativity. The same brain that overthinks is also the brain that can heal. By identifying what ignites your mental loops, you reclaim agency, not to control every thought, but to create the inner conditions where thoughts don't need to fight for your attention. Next, we'll step into the emotional core of this cascade, the amygdala, and explore how one ancient structure shapes your mental storm and how calming it may be, the most powerful step of all. Deep in the center of your brain lies a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Though modest in size, its influence is immense. It is the brain's emotional alarm bell, rapid, powerful, and often invisible in its effects. When it activates, everything changes: how you feel, what you notice, and most importantly, what you think. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, the emotional brain. It evolved long before your ability to reason or plan. In ancient times, it helped you survive by detecting threats. A shadow in the woods, a change in tone, the scent of something off. Today, it still serves that purpose, but its definition of threat has expanded. It no longer distinguishes between a real physical danger and a psychological discomfort. Both trigger the same alarm. Imagine you're trying to relax, but you remember a task you forgot, or you sense tension in a loved one's voice. The amygdala responds. It sends a surge through your salience network. Pay attention, this matters. Suddenly your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your thoughts begin to race, not because the situation is urgent, but because your amygdala believes it might be. This emotional signal, once triggered, primes the rest of the brain. The default mode network activates to help explain the emotion. Why am I uneasy? It asks. What went wrong? It begins a retrospective scan, searching memory, revisiting recent events, connecting dots. The more emotionally charged the memory, the more likely it is to be revisited. At the same time, the executive control network, the part of you that can assess, pause, and redirect, is weakened. Emotional arousal reduces its capacity. In this imbalance, thoughts that would normally pass are now caught, magnified, and repeated. Overthinking begins. The amygdala doesn't act alone. It collaborates. It communicates with the hippocampus, which processes memory, with the insula, which senses internal states, and with your prefrontal cortex. But when the amygdala dominates, it suppresses these areas' ability to reason. Logic feels distant. Perspective shrinks. The mind becomes reactive, focused on safety, real or imagined. And here's what makes the amygdala so powerful. It remembers. It holds on to emotional experiences. If a situation once made you feel helpless or ashamed, the amygdala stores that imprint. Later, when something even slightly similar arises, it rings the bell again. This feels familiar. Be careful. This is why you can overreact to small things. A glance, a tone, a delay. It's not just about the present moment. It's about echoes of the past. The amygdala doesn't speak in words. It speaks in patterns, in sensations, in unease. But while the amygdala is fast and loud, it can be soothed. One of the most effective ways to calm the amygdala is through the body, because the amygdala responds to physiological cues more than logical arguments. You can't think your way out of an amygdala hijack, but you can breathe your way through it. Slow, steady breath, gentle movement, soothing touch. These send messages of safety up to the brain. Another pathway is naming. When you identify an emotion, this is anxiety, this is fear, you activate your prefrontal cortex. You reconnect to the executive network. This doesn't eliminate the emotion, but it reduces its intensity. It reminds the brain that you are observing the feeling, not being controlled by it. Sleep also plays a vital role. The amygdala is highly sensitive to sleep deprivation. Just one poor night can increase emotional reactivity, making small stresses feel immense. Regular, restful sleep restores balance, strengthening the brain's regulatory circuits and reducing the chance of overactivation. But perhaps most crucial is the way you relate to the amygdala's messages. When a wave of emotion arises, you have a choice to resist it or to witness it. Resistance, why am I feeling this again, amplifies the signal. It tells the brain the emotion is dangerous. Witnessing, this is fear returning, creates distance. It calms the system. The amygdala isn't your enemy. It's a sentinel trying to protect you. But it sometimes overreacts. It sometimes cries wolf. Your task isn't to silence it, but to offer reassurance. Yes, I hear you. Yes, something feels off. And yes, we are safe. Over time, this relationship changes the brain. The more often you respond to emotional alarms with calm awareness, the more flexible your circuits become. The salience network learns that not every signal needs urgency. The default mode begins to quiet. The executive control network grows stronger, more stable. You begin to trust your own mind again, not because it's always quiet, but because it's no longer hijacked by every emotional tremor. In the next section, we'll explore the brain's need to predict and how your attempts to foresee the future can become one of the most persistent drivers of overthinking, especially when the amygdala has already been stirred. The human brain is a prediction machine. It doesn't just react to the present, it anticipates the future. Every moment, it scans for patterns, tries to forecast outcomes, and rehearses possibilities. This predictive ability is part of what makes you intelligent, adaptable, and creative. But it's also the mechanism behind one of the most exhausting features of overthinking, mental simulation. At the heart of this process lies the default mode network. When your external demands pause, this network takes the stage. It projects into tomorrow, next week, or years ahead, crafting detailed scenarios, some hopeful, others full of dread. It doesn't just imagine outcomes, it feels them. The brain in these moments activates much of the same circuitry used for real experiences. So when you imagine a failure or a confrontation, your body reacts as if it's happening now. This predictive thinking, when balanced, is useful. It helps you prepare, avoid danger, and envision goals. But when it runs unchecked, especially under the influence of an anxious salience network and a fatigued executive system, it becomes a loop. You don't just anticipate, you anticipate again and again, searching for a perfect script, a guaranteed safety, a reassurance that never quite arrives. This is how the future becomes loud. Your brain, sensing uncertainty, begins to fill in the blanks. It prefers a bad story over no story at all, so it imagines conflict, loss, embarrassment, and regret, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it hopes that if you see it coming, you'll be prepared. But emotional preparation isn't the same as mental rehearsal. Anticipating pain doesn't prevent it. Often it only brings the suffering closer. Overthinking about the future creates a tension between your mind and your body. Your thoughts live in tomorrow, but your nervous system reacts now. This disconnect is tiring. It leads to restlessness, irritability, and a subtle sense of dislocation. You may feel present physically, but mentally distant, preoccupied with what might be. The need to predict often stems from fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of loss, fear of repeating past pain. And because the brain learns through association, any past moment of surprise or trauma increases the desire for control. If only I had seen it coming, you think. So now the brain scans obsessively, trying to predict not just major events, but every interaction, every decision, every possible misstep. This leads to what some call analysis paralysis. You overthink not because the choice is complex, but because you want a guarantee. You delay action, waiting for the perfect answer. But the more you think, the less clarity you find. Because the future, by nature, is uncertain. No amount of mental rehearsal can erase that truth. And yet your brain keeps trying. So how do you break this cycle? Start by recognizing that prediction is a form of care. Your mind is trying to protect you. When you thank it, not sarcastically, but sincerely, you reduce the inattention. Thank you for trying to help. But right now, I choose to rest. This internal gesture softens the compulsion. Next, shift from prediction to preparation. They are different. Prediction seeks certainty. Preparation builds resilience. You can prepare for the possibility of conflict without imagining every painful word. You can plan your day without rehearsing every failure. Ask yourself, what part of this future moment can I actually influence? And what part must I learn to meet when it comes? Another helpful approach is to ground yourself in sensory presence. When your mind leaps forward, return to now. Feel the texture of your pillow. Listen to the quiet rhythm of your breath. Remind your nervous system, right now, nothing is required. The act of noticing the present reactivates your executive control network. It tethers you to safety. Journaling can also help. Rather than letting your predictive thoughts swirl unexamined, write them down. Once visible, many fears lose their intensity. You can ask, is this likely? Is this useful? Is this kind? Writing engages logic. It turns vague dread into clear language, language that you can question, reframe, or release. And then, gently, practice acceptance, not as resignation, but as humility. The future will come. You will meet it with whatever wisdom, strength, and grace is available in that moment. You don't need to solve it now. You only need to be present enough to live it when it arrives. There is a strange peace in this realization that no matter how much your mind prepares, the future will still surprise you. That's not a flaw. It's the nature of life, and the more you soften around this truth, the less tightly your mind needs to grip. Overthinking fades not because you stop imagining, but because you learn to trust your capacity to respond, not just rehearse. In the next section, we'll distinguish between different forms of repetitive thought, how preoccupations, ruminations, and obsessions each have their own emotional tone and rhythm, and why knowing the difference can help you find a way out. Not all repetitive thoughts are the same, though they may feel similar, circling, sticky, hard to stop. There are distinct shades and shapes to overthinking. Some thoughts come with urgency, others with heaviness. Some pull you into the future, others trap you in the past. To understand your own mind, it helps to recognize these differences. Let's begin with preoccupations. These are persistent thoughts that often revolve around real-life concerns. They may involve your work, your health, your relationships, or responsibilities. They carry a what-if tone. What if I'm forgetting something? What if this goes wrong? What if I'm not enough? Preoccupations are often tied to external situations and can fluctuate throughout the day. In calmer moments, they ease. They respond to context, distraction, or reassurance. But when emotional arousal is high, they become louder and more insistent. Preoccupations are the surface layer of overthinking. They often serve as a signal. Something in your environment or internal world needs attention. You may be facing a decision, carrying too much, or feeling emotionally unsafe. When preoccupations pile up, they can clutter the mind, making it hard to focus or rest, but they are often still manageable. You can set them down at least temporarily. Ruminations, by contrast, are heavier. They tend to be deeply self-referential, emotionally sticky, and difficult to shift. Ruminations often loop around past experiences, what you said, what happened, what you regret. They carry a sense of helplessness, unlike preoccupations, which search for action. Ruminations seem to search for punishment or resolution. They play on themes of guilt, shame, or failure. Ruminative thinking often feels like being pulled under. You may start by reflecting on something harmless, but quickly descend into cycles of self-criticism. The same images replay, the same sentences echo, and even when you know it's not helpful, you feel unable to stop. This is because ruminations are often fueled by unresolved emotion, particularly sadness and hopelessness. The default mode network dominates, while the executive control network loses its ability to intervene. Then there are obsessions. These are intrusive, unwanted thoughts that feel foreign or distressing. They may arrive suddenly, without clear triggers. They can be violent, bizarre, or disturbing, not because you believe them, but because you fear what they mean. Obsessions are often ego-dystonic, meaning they clash with your values. That clash makes them more distressing. You wonder, why did I think that? What does that say about me? Obsessions differ from ruminations in their unpredictability and their intensity. They are usually short, sharp, and recurring, and because they're so uncomfortable, they often generate compulsions, mental or physical rituals, meant to neutralize the thought. This is the territory of obsessive-compulsive patterns. The brain tries to gain control over the uncontrollable, but the more you resist, the more powerful the thought becomes. Understanding these layers helps you respond differently. When facing preoccupations, your focus is often external. What needs to be addressed? Is there an action you're avoiding? Can you schedule a time to think about this instead of carrying it all day? Often organizing your thoughts and creating structure brings relief. Preoccupations respond well to planning, prioritizing, and calming routines. With ruminations, The key is emotional processing. Since they're driven by feelings that haven't been fully metabolized, you might ask, what am I really feeling underneath this thought? Often it's sadness, or shame, or the need for forgiveness, either of yourself or someone else. Naming the emotion helps. So does expressing it gently through journaling, talking, or even crying. Ruminations begin to fade when the emotion behind them is given space to breathe. Obsessions require compassion and non-engagement. Because they are so intrusive, they often feel dangerous. But thoughts, even strange ones, are not actions. They are neural misfires, signals seeking attention. Trying to suppress them gives them more power. Instead, acknowledge them lightly. That's just a thought. Then gently redirect. Obsessions lose their grip when they're not fed with fear. What's important to remember is that all these forms of overthinking exist on a spectrum. One can blur into another. A preoccupation can deepen into a rumination. A rumination can generate obsessive fears, and all of them feed on the same conditions: emotional arousal, fatigue, isolation, and lack of structure. So rather than labeling yourself, focus on tuning in. What kind of thought is this? What feeling lies beneath it? What does my mind believe it's protecting me from? When you explore these questions with curiosity, you reclaim some of your mental freedom. And remember, overthinking is not weakness. It is your brain's way of coping when it lacks clarity, safety, or rest. It is trying to solve, to protect, to soothe. But sometimes the most helpful thing isn't solving the thought, it's softening the state beneath it. Next, we'll explore what happens when these thought patterns begin to drain your cognitive resources, leading to mental exhaustion, and why your brain sometimes feels like it can't keep up. When your mind is constantly active, navigating preoccupations, ruminations, and obsessions, it's easy to forget that thinking itself consumes energy, and not just metaphorically. Thought is a biological process. It involves neurons firing, chemicals transmitting, circuits engaging. The more intensely you think, the more fuel your brain uses. And like any system pushed beyond its limits, it begins to wear down. This is where mental fatigue enters the picture. Mental fatigue is not just a feeling of being tired. It's a specific kind of cognitive weariness, marked by slower thinking, foggy focus, emotional reactivity, and reduced problem-solving ability. It's what happens when your brain has spent too long in high gear, trying to resolve the unresolved, anticipate the unpredictable, or make sense of overwhelming emotion. In overthinking, this fatigue builds silently. You may not notice it until suddenly everything feels harder. Decisions that once felt simple now feel paralyzing. Concentration slips. Conversations require effort. Even joyful experiences feel dulled. It's as if your mental world has dimmed, quiet, not from peace, but from depletion. But why does this happen? Every cognitive function, attention, memory, reasoning, relies on networks within your brain. These networks draw from a finite pool of energy. When you overuse them, especially the prefrontal cortex, which manages decision-making and regulation, they begin to function less efficiently. Imagine a flashlight whose batteries are slowly dying. The light still shines, but it flickers, its reach narrows. The same happens in your mind. In this depleted state, the balance between the brain's networks becomes even more fragile. The default mode network, which thrives in unstructured time, grows louder. The executive control network, responsible for restraint and redirection, weakens. This imbalance creates the perfect environment for overthinking to thrive and for thought loops to become more distorted. You begin to misinterpret small cues. Neutral interactions feel cold. A delayed response becomes a rejection. Fatigue makes the world feel heavier. Your emotional filter thickens, casting shadows where there may be none. At the same time, your inner voice grows sharper. Self-criticism increases. Thoughts become more rigid, less creative. The mind clings to problems, not solutions, because when the brain is exhausted, it defaults to survival mode, focusing on threats, even if imagined. This is why overthinking often leads to burnout. Not just emotional or physical burnout, but cognitive burnout. The sense that your mind can no longer carry the weight of its own processing. And because thought is so tied to identity, this mental fatigue can feel deeply personal. You may begin to question your worth, your capacity, your resilience. But mental fatigue is not a flaw, it's a signal. It's your brain's way of asking for rest, not just from activity, but from effortful thinking. So how do you respond? First, acknowledge the fatigue. Instead of pushing through or blaming yourself for your reduced focus, name what's happening. My brain is tired. This small act of recognition reduces resistance. It shifts you from judgment to care. Then create space. Fatigue doesn't always need sleep. It needs unstructured restoration. Gentle walks, slow music, time in nature, light reading, activities that soothe without demanding. These don't just distract, they recalibrate. They allow your neural systems to disengage, to breathe. Also, reduce decision density. Every choice consumes energy. When mentally fatigued, simplify your environment. Plan meals ahead, set routines. Reduce cognitive load wherever possible. This creates a buffer for your mind to recover. Importantly, resist the urge to overcorrect your thoughts when tired. Reflection and reframing are valuable, but they require mental clarity. If your mind is foggy, focus on comfort, not correction. Let the thoughts pass like clouds. Engage with them later, when energy returns. And remember, emotional regulation suffers when the mind is depleted. You may feel more irritable, more tearful, more reactive. This too is normal. It's not who you are, it's how your nervous system behaves under strain. Gentle practices can help restore balance. Breathing exercises, brief meditations, lying still with awareness on breath or sound. Even 5 minutes of intentional stillness can begin to shift your state, not because it solves the thought, but because it soothes the system. Mental fatigue is often mistaken for weakness, but it's simply biology. When your brain has carried too much for too long without pause, it asks you to slow down. And when you listen, truly listen, something beautiful happens. The noise begins to settle, not all at once, but slowly. A thought becomes lighter, a breath deeper, and clarity, soft, quiet clarity, returns. Next, we'll examine one of the most frustrating experiences in overthinking, the inability to let go of thoughts, even when you want to. Why some thoughts refuse to fade, and how the brain's emotional circuitry reinforces their grip. You've probably had this experience. A thought appears, unwelcome, persistent, unhelpful, and no matter how many times you try to dismiss it, it returns. You reason with it. You distract yourself. You even tell yourself it's irrational. Yet, like a song stuck in your head, it lingers. This is the emotional grip of thought, the reason you can't just let it go. To understand why some thoughts cling, we must look beyond logic. The stickiness of a thought is not a measure of its truth. It is a measure of its emotional charge. When a thought is infused with strong emotion, fear, shame, regret, it becomes tagged by the brain's salience network. That tag makes the thought stand out. Your mind recognizes it as important, even if it isn't helpful. This process is entirely subconscious. You don't choose which thoughts to highlight. Your emotional circuits do it for you, especially the amygdala. Once a thought has been marked as significant, your attention is drawn to it repeatedly. It interrupts your rest, hijacks your concentration, and resurfaces at the quietest times. This emotional tagging is a survival mechanism. The brain evolved to remember emotionally intense experiences, especially negative ones, because they might contain information about danger. If a past situation caused pain or embarrassment, your brain wants to avoid repeating it, so it replays the thought, hoping you'll find a solution or remain alert. It doesn't realize that the threat has passed or that no solution exists. Here lies the paradox. The more you try to push away an emotionally charged thought, the more your brain registers it as significant. Suppression becomes attention. Resistance becomes reinforcement. This is sometimes called the white bear effect. Try not to think of a white bear, and it's all you see. So what can you do? The answer begins with allowance. This doesn't mean resigning yourself to suffering. It means recognizing that trying to force thoughts away often strengthens them. Instead of pushing, practice noticing. There's that thought again. No battle, no judgment, just observation. This act of noticing activates your prefrontal cortex. It reconnects you to the executive control network, the part of your brain that brings perspective. And as you strengthen this connection, the thought begins to lose its emotional weight. Next, explore the emotion beneath the thought, because often what fuels persistence is not the thought's content, but what it protects. A fear of rejection, a memory of failure, a longing for control. When you meet the emotion with curiosity, you shift from suppression to integration. For example, a recurring thought like, "I messed everything up," may stem from unacknowledged guilt. Instead of trying to stop the thought, ask, "What might I be needing right now?" Forgiveness, reassurance, a sense of worth. These questions gently open space for healing. Another powerful practice is externalization. When thoughts loop internally, they feel endless, but when you write them down or speak them aloud, they become finite. You can see them, hear them, evaluate them. Often, they lose intensity. What once felt consuming becomes a paragraph, a sentence, a single worry on a page. Mindfulness also offers a pathway out, not by silencing thoughts, but by sitting alongside them. When you anchor yourself in breath, sound, or sensation, you create space between awareness and content. The thought may remain, but it no longer defines your experience. It becomes one voice among many, not the only voice. Importantly, letting go is not the same as forgetting. Some thoughts return because they carry unresolved meaning. Perhaps they relate to grief, or unfinished transitions, or choices you're still making peace with. In these cases, the goal is not erasure. It's understanding, compassion, closure, and sometimes what you need most is rest. Overthinking often intensifies when you are tired, overwhelmed, or stretched thin. In this state, the brain struggles to regulate thought flow. It reacts instead of reflects. Before trying to change your thoughts, ask, "Is my system supported?" Gentle care, sleep, nourishment, time in nature can do more for mental clarity than hours of analysis. Letting go, then, is not a single act. It is a posture, a willingness to witness your inner world without clenching, a trust that not every thought must be solved, and a practice of returning, again and again, to presence. You may still feel the pull. That's okay. Letting go doesn't mean you no longer notice the thought. It means you no longer fight it. Over time, the thought's intensity fades. It may still visit, but it won't stay. In the next section, we'll explore how this cycle of thought entanglement affects your ability to make decisions, why even simple choices become overwhelming when overthinking takes hold, and how to restore clarity. There's a particular kind of mental gridlock that sets in when overthinking has taken root. You stand before a choice, sometimes big, sometimes small, and find yourself stuck. You weigh every option, consider every angle, anticipate every consequence. Yet the more you analyze, the harder the decision becomes. This is analysis paralysis. At first glance it seems logical. You want to make the best choice. You don't want to regret. But beneath that desire lies a deeper dynamic. The brain's attempt to eliminate uncertainty. Overthinking promises safety. It whispers, if you just think long enough, you'll find the perfect path. But perfection is an illusion, and the search for it only deepens the paralysis. This happens because decisions, like thoughts, are filtered through emotional circuits. The amygdala evaluates risk. The salience network flags what feels urgent. And when fear or doubt is present, these systems amplify the stakes. A simple choice, what to say, where to go, what to prioritize, suddenly feels weighty. Your mind starts asking, what if I choose wrong? At the same time, your executive control network, which helps you focus and evaluate, is under strain. Emotional arousal reduces its capacity, so even as you try to reason through the options, your thinking becomes rigid. You cycle between extremes. If I do this, it's a disaster, but if I don't, I'll regret it. Nuance fades. Creativity shrinks. You become locked in binary thinking. And as your options multiply, each with imagined outcomes, so does your distress. The brain struggles with cognitive overload. It can only hold so many variables at once. When that limit is exceeded, clarity dissolves. You feel overwhelmed, unsure, frustrated. In this state, many people delay action. They postpone decisions, hoping more time will bring clarity. Sometimes it does, but often delay becomes its own loop. The lack of resolution breeds more anxiety, and the decision grows heavier with time. So how can you break free? The first step is understanding that clarity often follows action, not the other way around. Your mind may never feel 100% certain, and that's okay. Instead of searching for the perfect choice, aim for the next right-size step. What can you do that is helpful, not perfect? What moves you forward without demanding total certainty? Next, reduce decision density. When overwhelmed, simplify your options. Write them down. Speak them aloud. Externalizing the choice shrinks the loop. It moves you from mental rumination to tangible consideration. You can also set boundaries around thinking time. Give yourself 15 or 30 minutes to explore options. Then commit to a direction. This structure contains the spiral. It tells your brain, we've given this attention, now we choose. Another powerful tool is value alignment. Instead of asking, what will cause the least regret? Ask, what reflects my values? When you choose from values rather than fear, you restore agency. The decision may still be hard, but it becomes meaningful. Also, pay attention to bodily cues. Your nervous system often knows before your mind does. Sit with each option. How does your body respond? Tension, ease, fatigue. Your intuition is not magic. It's accumulated experience, encoded in sensation. When anxiety is high, decision-making can also benefit from co-regulation. Talk to someone grounded, not to seek answers, but to calm your system. Sometimes clarity arises not from better analysis, but from emotional steadiness. Once the emotional storm quiets, the answer is often clear. Importantly, forgive yourself for past decisions. Regret fuels indecision. If you believe that every choice must be flawless, you'll hesitate endlessly. But decisions are rarely final. Most can be revised, adjusted, repaired. Life is not a test with one correct answer. It's a flow of experiences, each teaching you more about who you are. And sometimes the answer isn't ready. That's okay too. If clarity doesn't come, try this gentle mantra. I will know when I need to know. Trust that your mind is processing, even when silent. Let patience replace pressure. You are not indecisive by nature. You are thoughtful, sensitive, aware of consequences. These are gifts, but when untamed, they can become burdens. The goal is not to eliminate careful thinking, but to temper it with trust. In the next section, we'll explore how overthinking and sleep form a feedback loop, how mental clutter keeps you awake, and how poor rest feeds mental loops in return. As night falls and the world quiets, the mind often does the opposite. Thoughts that stayed politely in the background during the day now rise to the surface, sharper, louder, more insistent. You lie in bed, eyes closed, body still, and yet inside your head movement continues. This is the nightly dialogue of overthinking and sleep, a conversation that rarely leads to rest. The relationship between sleep and overthinking is deeply intertwined. On one hand, racing thoughts prevent sleep from taking hold. On the other, sleep deprivation amplifies those very thoughts, making them harder to manage the next day. It is a cycle, one that begins subtly, but can become deeply entrenched. To understand this pattern, we need to explore the brain's rhythms. Sleep is not a passive state. It's an active, organized process governed by complex systems. When night approaches, your body begins to produce melatonin, a hormone that signals your brain to wind down. Your core temperature drops slightly. Your nervous system shifts into a more parasympathetic state, rest and digest. The brain prepares to hand over control from the sharp conscious processing of daytime to the slower restorative cycles of sleep. But this transition is delicate. The default mode network, which governs much of your internal thought landscape, is highly active in the absence of external stimulation. When your body becomes still and your eyes close, this network often awakens. If your day was full of stress, unresolved emotions, or cognitive clutter, this is when those thoughts seek expression. This is not dysfunction, it's timing. Your brain is trying to process what it didn't have time to address earlier. But if the emotional arousal remains high, if the salience network is still alert, scanning for threats, then the calming descent into sleep is interrupted. You stay suspended, mentally active, but physically still, caught in a liminal state. This is where sleep onset insomnia often appears. You want to sleep, you feel tired, yet the mind won't quiet. It replays conversations, projects, fears, constructs unlikely scenarios. The more you try to will sleep into existence, the further it slips away. And the longer you lie awake, the more the body begins to respond as if something is wrong. Cortisol rises, heart rate increases, muscles tense slightly. This feedback tells the brain, stay alert. So the very act of not sleeping becomes a stressor. A mind trying to rest becomes a mind preparing for battle. Then comes morning. Your sleep was light or fragmented. You awaken groggy, unrefreshed. And now, with a tired brain, your emotional regulation is compromised. Small stresses feel larger. Focus wavers. The salience network is more easily triggered. Thoughts, already sticky, become even more so. The cycle tightens. So how do we begin to unwind it? First, understand that rest is not only found in sleep. Gentle pre-sleep rituals, reading, stretching, warm baths, soft sounds can signal safety to your nervous system. These routines cue the brain. It's time to shift states. They don't guarantee sleep, but they prepare the soil. Next, externalize your thoughts before bed. Journaling can be powerful. Write down what's on your mind, not to fix it, but to give it space. The act of expression reduces mental load. It tells your brain, we've acknowledged this, we don't need to rehearse it again tonight. Avoid stimulating the salience network in the hour before bed. This means reducing exposure to screens, intense conversations, or planning tasks. Bright light, emotional conflict, or complex decisions can all activate your alert systems. Instead, favor low lighting, quiet tones, and activities that ground you in the senses. And when you do lie down, shift from thought-based awareness to sensory presence. Feel your body against the bed. Notice the rhythm of your breath. If thoughts arise, and they will, acknowledge them softly, thinking. Then return to sensation, not because sensation is better, but because it anchors you in the now. If sleep still doesn't come, practice rest without expectation. Let the goal be stillness, not sleep. Listen to calm sounds. Repeat a gentle phrase. Tell yourself, this is enough for now. Paradoxically, removing the pressure to sleep can invite it more easily. During the day, support your brain with consistent rhythms. Wake and sleep at regular times. Get exposure to morning light. Move your body. Eat nourishing food. These habits regulate your internal clock, strengthen your circadian rhythm, and reduce the intensity of nighttime wakefulness. And if sleep struggles persist, seek support, because when the mind cannot rest, the body suffers. And when the body is deprived of sleep, the mind becomes a storm. You deserve rest, not just as a function, but as a right. In the next section, we'll dive into the science of intrusive thoughts, those sudden unwanted mental arrivals that seem to come from nowhere, and what they reveal about your brain's attempt to manage uncertainty and control. There are moments when a thought appears suddenly, jarring, unexpected, and often unsettling. It might be an image, a phrase, a fear. It interrupts your flow, hijacks your attention, and leaves you wondering, why did I think that? These are intrusive thoughts, and they are more common and more misunderstood than many realize. An intrusive thought is not a belief, it is not a desire, it is not a reflection of your values or intentions. It is a mental event, often emotionally charged, that arrives uninvited. It might be violent, inappropriate, or absurd, and precisely because it feels so foreign, it creates a ripple of discomfort. The origin of intrusive thoughts lies in the same neural machinery that helps you plan, imagine, and anticipate. The default mode network, which constructs your internal narratives, can generate images and scenarios without conscious prompting. Usually, these drift by unnoticed, but when the salience network tags one as emotionally significant, especially if it feels threatening or shameful, it becomes sticky. It grabs your attention. The brain then does what it has evolved to do. It tries to make sense of the signal. Why did this come up? What does it mean? Am I okay? But in doing so, it unintentionally strengthens the connection. It treats the thought as urgent, as meaningful, as dangerous, even when it isn't. This is where intrusive thoughts become loops. Not because they are true, but because they are feared. The mind attempts to push them away, and in doing so, rehearses them. The brain, noticing the repeated engagement, assumes importance, and the thought returns again. It's important to recognize that intrusive thoughts are a feature of a sensitive, alert brain, not a flaw. They often appear in periods of stress, fatigue, or emotional intensity, and their content is frequently the opposite of what you value. That's why they feel so disturbing. The mismatch between the thought and your self-image creates cognitive dissonance. But intrusive thoughts are not instructions. They are echoes, random firings in a system trained to detect threat, prevent harm, and anticipate risk. Sometimes they arise from memory fragments, other times from associative connections the brain makes without your awareness. You see a knife, and the brain imagines an accident. You walk by a ledge, and the mind flashes a fall. These are not desires, they are simulations, automated and unchosen. So how do you relate to them? The key is non-engagement. When a thought feels intrusive, your first impulse may be to evaluate it, suppress it, or argue with it. Resist that urge. Instead, name it gently. That's an intrusive thought. Labeling creates space. It reminds you that not every thought requires response. Next, practice allowance without attention. Let the thought be there, like background noise. You don't need to push it away, just don't feed it. Bring your focus to something neutral, your breath, the feeling of your feet, the sound in the room. When the thought resurfaces, repeat the process, not with urgency, but with steadiness. Compassion is also vital. Intrusive thoughts can feel shameful, but shame only deepens their grip. Remind yourself, this thought does not define me. It's a mental event, not a reflection of who I am. Over time, this reduces the emotional charge. For some, intrusive thoughts become part of a broader pattern of obsessive thinking. When this happens, professional support, especially through therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or exposure and response prevention, ERP, can help. These approaches teach you how to relate to thoughts differently, reduce fear, and restore calm. And if the thoughts feel overwhelming, remember this: thoughts are not dangerous, they are transient. No matter how vivid or disturbing they seem, they are not real events. They pass like weather, strong one moment, fading the next. What keeps them alive is not their content, but the meaning we attach to them. In this way, intrusive thoughts offer an unexpected gift. They show us the power of attention, the habits of interpretation, and the resilience of a brain learning to feel safe again. As you practice letting them pass, without resistance or fear, you build trust, not in your thoughts, but in your ability to observe them without being swept away. In the next section, we'll explore how emotional memory intertwines with thought patterns, how the past shapes your present inner dialogue, and why healing often requires tending not just to the thought, but to the emotion beneath it. Your thoughts are not born in isolation. Each one is shaped, colored, and influenced by what came before, by your experiences, your memories, your emotional landscape. When a thought feels unusually heavy, persistent, or charged, it often carries the imprint of emotional memory. This is the silent architecture beneath overthinking. Emotional memory is not always explicit. You might not recall the event itself, but your nervous system remembers how it felt. The tone of a voice, a certain look, a sudden silence. These cues can awaken an emotional echo. The brain, trying to protect you, ties current situations to past pain, then delivers thoughts designed to prevent a repeat. But in doing so, it often misfires. Imagine your mind like a vast library. Each emotion-rich experience creates a file. When a new situation arises, your brain subconsciously asks, "Have I felt this before?" If the answer is yes, it retrieves the old file, even if the context is different. A disagreement with a friend might stir feelings from childhood rejection. A delay in communication may echo past abandonment, and before you know it, a minor event becomes the start of a mental storm. This is why some thoughts feel exaggerated. They are not just about now, they are layered with unprocessed then. The present moment becomes a canvas onto which the past is projected. The hippocampus, responsible for memory, and the amygdala, which governs emotional salience, work closely here. Together, they decide which experiences are stored deeply and which fade. Emotional intensity increases storage strength. That's why painful or traumatic events remain vivid even decades later. The mind stores not only the facts, but the sensations, the beliefs, the helplessness. These emotionally charged memories can become schemas, deep-seated beliefs about yourself, others, or the world. I'm not safe. People will leave me. I always mess up. These beliefs may not be conscious, but they influence thought patterns. When something happens that fits the schema, your brain sounds the alarm, even if the danger is imagined. And so the loop begins. An external trigger activates an old emotion. The emotion brings a memory. The memory fuels a thought. The thought reinforces the emotion, and round you go. This cycle isn't broken by logic. It's interrupted by awareness, compassion, and integration. Start by noticing patterns. Are there certain themes to your overthinking? Do your thoughts often circle back to rejection, failure, or control? These patterns are clues. They point not to flaws, but to wounds, places where healing is still unfolding. When you notice a recurring thought, pause and ask, what does this remind me of? Not to get stuck in the past, but to recognize what part of you is speaking. Often, the overthinking mind is protecting a younger self, one who felt powerless, unseen, or afraid. Meeting that part with kindness can be transformative. You might say internally, I hear you. I know this feels familiar, but we're not in the same place anymore. This reframes the experience. It reconnects you to the present, where choice and agency are available. Another powerful tool is inner dialogue journaling. Write from the voice of the overthinking part. Let it speak freely. Then respond from your current wiser self. This process helps you externalize the loop, create distance, and access compassion. You begin to see the overthinking not as weakness, but but as a coping strategy, one that once kept you safe. Therapeutic work can also support this process. Trauma-informed therapies like EMDR or internal family systems help uncover and integrate emotional memories that fuel persistent thought loops. These approaches work not by erasing the past, but by updating it, reminding your nervous system that the danger has passed. And in daily life, practice emotional literacy. When thoughts race, pause and ask, what am I feeling underneath? Often, naming the emotion, grief, shame, loneliness, softens the mental noise. Emotions that are seen need less to be heard through obsessive thought. Because ultimately overthinking is not just a mental pattern, it's an emotional signal. It tells you where something remains unresolved, where the past is coloring the present, where a younger part of you is still asking, am I safe? The goal isn't to silence these signals, it's to understand them, to meet them not with fear, but with presence. And slowly, thought by thought, feeling by feeling, the past begins to loosen its grip. In the next section, we'll look at the role of identity, how who you believe you are affects what you think, and why shifting self-concept can be one of the most powerful ways to calm an overactive mind. Who you believe you are quietly shapes how you think, not just in obvious ways like confidence or self-doubt, but deep within your cognitive architecture. Every belief you hold about yourself, whether empowering or limiting, acts like a lens through which your thoughts are filtered, and when that identity is rigid, wounded, or conflicted, overthinking often becomes the mind's way of trying to hold it together. This is the connection between identity and cognition. From early life, you begin constructing a sense of self. It forms from your experiences, your relationships, your roles. You gather feedback, what's praised, what's punished, what's expected, and weave those messages into a narrative. I'm the smart one, I'm too much, I have to be perfect to be loved. These self-narratives become internal templates. They influence not only how you act, but how you think. If your identity includes I must not fail, then every choice carries more weight. Mistakes feel catastrophic, and thoughts race endlessly trying to avoid shame. If your self-concept includes I'm responsible for others' feelings, then interactions are analyzed obsessively. You replay conversations, search for cues, apologize preemptively, not because you're overreacting, but because your identity makes it feel necessary. This is how overthinking often becomes self-protective. The mind isn't malfunctioning, it's defending who you believe you must be. But in doing so, it can trap you, because the more rigid the identity, the less room there is for nuance, for mistakes, for rest. The prefrontal cortex, which governs self-awareness and regulation, becomes overtaxed. It tries to hold up the story, the capable one, the kind one, the invulnerable one. But when that story is threatened by conflict, failure, or uncertainty, the salience network flares. The mind goes into repair mode, trying to reinforce the identity with obsessive thought. And yet, paradoxically, many of these identities were never freely chosen. They were inherited, imposed, or formed under pressure. A child who sensed that approval came only when they succeeded may grow into an adult who overthinks every project. A teenager who learned that emotions were too much may overanalyze every feeling, trying to keep it contained. The path to freedom begins with identity awareness. Gently ask yourself, what roles do I feel I must fulfill? What happens when I don't meet them? Whose expectations am I still carrying? These are not easy questions, but they reveal the roots of your thought patterns. They help you see that much of your overthinking is not about the external world. It's about maintaining coherence within. To shift this, you don't need to erase who you are. You need to expand it, make space for more truths. You can be both thoughtful and sometimes forgetful, strong and still vulnerable, caring without being responsible for everyone. This expansion softens the mind. When identity is flexible, the stakes of every thought decrease. A mistake becomes a moment, not a verdict. A difficult feeling becomes part of your experience, not a threat to your self-worth. One powerful practice here is self-concept journaling. Instead of focusing on goals or tasks, write about who you are becoming. Use phrases like, "I'm learning to," or "I'm allowed to." These open doors. They remind the mind that growth is not a betrayal of identity, it's the fulfillment of it. Therapeutic work can also help untangle inherited roles. Many people carry ancestral or cultural expectations within their identity. A therapist can help you discern what's yours, what was given, and what you wish to evolve. And in your daily life, practice identity rest. Give yourself time and spaces where no role is required. Not the achiever, the helper, the thinker. Even brief moments of simply being, without narrative or function, offer deep nervous system relief. Because when the mind is always managing a fragile identity, rest feels unsafe. But when identity becomes a garden, not a cage, when it can hold contradiction and change, then the mind no longer needs to work so hard to defend it. In the next section, we'll explore how social comparison fuels overthinking, how modern connectivity feeds mental loops, and how to reclaim your sense of enoughness in a world of constant mirrors. In today's world, your mind is rarely alone. Even when your body is still, the thoughts of others echo in your feed, your inbox, your memory. You scroll, glance, compare. Not consciously, perhaps, not with judgment, but with a quiet calculation. Where do I stand? Am I behind? Should I be doing more? This constant measuring feeds a particular kind of overthinking, the kind born from social comparison. Comparison is not new. For millennia, humans have looked to one another for cues, how to behave, how to belong, how to survive. It was once essential, but now this instinct operates in an environment it was never designed for. You no longer compare yourself to a village of 100. You compare to a world of millions, curated, filtered, performing, and this amplifies the inner noise. Your brain, always scanning for relevance, picks up on signals, success, beauty, achievement, happiness, even if you know it's selective, even if you remind yourself it's curated. Your nervous system still responds. The salience network lights up. The mind starts weaving narratives. They're thriving. I'm falling behind. What's wrong with me? These thoughts don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. A slight unease when you see someone's highlight. A flicker of urgency when you hear of a peer's progress. A subtle dimming of your own joy when it feels insufficient by comparison. These are signs of the mind entangled in relational cognition, the attempt to define self through others. This entanglement becomes particularly potent when your identity feels uncertain. In moments of transition, insecurity, or fatigue, the mind reaches outward for validation. It says, "Tell me I'm okay." And when the response is silence, or worse, self-doubt, the mind fills the gap with overthinking. You replay interactions. You dissect likes and messages. You wonder what others think, what you should say, whether you're keeping up. Thought becomes performance, and over time, it becomes exhausting. So how do you reclaim your inner quiet? First, recognize that comparison is a mental reflex, not a moral failing. Your brain is designed to notice difference, to assess safety, to seek belonging. The goal is not to eliminate this reflex, but to guide it with awareness. Start by naming it. When you notice yourself spiraling after seeing someone's post or hearing their news, pause. Say, "This is comparison." Just naming creates space. It shifts you from fusion to observation. Next, return to context. What you see of others is a surface, an edited glimpse, not the full story. Everyone has struggle. Everyone carries pain. And what looks effortless often carries invisible weight. Remind yourself, I'm comparing my behind the scenes to their highlight reel. Also tend to your own narrative. Overthinking thrives when your own story feels undefined. Create touch points for your values, your goals, your growth. Journal about what matters to you, what you've overcome, what you're learning. The stronger your internal compass, the less swayed you'll be by external winds. You can also limit input, curate your digital space. Follow accounts that nourish, not trigger. Create screen-free zones or times. Give your brain rest from constant comparison, not out of avoidance, but out of respect for your inner world. And remember, enoughness is not a destination, it's a practice. You do not need to be extraordinary to be worthy. You do not need to be seen to be valid. You are not behind. You are not late. You are living a story that unfolds in its own rhythm. To support this, practice mirror work of the mind. When a comparing thought arises, respond with a counter thought rooted in kindness. I see their joy, and I'm allowed to have my own pace. Their path is not my measure. I am growing in ways that aren't always visible. Finally, nourish real connection. Social media mimics community, but often increases isolation. Make time for honest conversations. Share your struggles, not just your wins. This rehumanizes your comparisons. It reminds you that everyone is figuring it out. Because overthinking in the age of comparison is not just about others. It's about forgetting yourself, forgetting that your worth is not measured in metrics, that your timeline is not a race, that your value is not up for debate. In the next section, we'll explore the link between control and overthinking, how the mind tries to manage uncertainty through thought, and what happens when you learn to trust the unknown. Overthinking often disguises itself as responsibility. It whispers, if you just think through every angle, anticipate every outcome, stay vigilant, then nothing bad will happen. Beneath this drive is a yearning for control of events, of emotions, of the future. But thought cannot control life, and when the mind tries to manage the uncontrollable, it enters a loop that tightens with every turn. This is the relationship between control and overthinking. Control, in its healthy form, helps you plan, organize, protect. It sets boundaries, solves problems, navigates complexity. But when fear is present, when the unknown feels threatening, control becomes hyperactive. The mind begins to believe that certainty equals safety, and thought becomes its primary tool. You begin scanning for risks, replaying what happened, pre-playing what might. Your inner dialogue becomes dominated by what if and how do I make sure. But the more you think, the less certain you feel, because uncertainty is not a problem to solve, it's a reality to accept. The prefrontal cortex works overtime here. It seeks clarity, closure, a guarantee, but life offers none, and so the mind keeps spinning, like a wheel, looking for traction on water. This overuse of cognitive control creates stress. It signals to the salience network that something is wrong. Emotional arousal increases, the body tenses, sleep diminishes, and thought, now fused with anxiety, accelerates. Ironically, this desire to control can also block healing, because some emotions, some experiences cannot be controlled. They must be felt, witnessed, allowed. But when the mind resists them, it extends suffering. It tries to outthink grief, outsmart fear, navigate love without risk. To unwind this pattern, begin with recognition. Ask yourself, what am I trying to control with this thought? Often, the answer is emotion, discomfort, vulnerability, ambiguity. Let yourself feel that. Label the emotion. Sit with it, not to change it, but to honor it. Next, explore the cost. Control offers short-term relief but long-term tension. Overthinking feels productive, but how does it leave you feeling? Drained, anxious, frozen? Naming this cost helps the mind consider a different approach. Then, experiment with trust building. Start small. Choose one situation today where you allow uncertainty. You don't rehearse the conversation. You don't double-check the message. You don't plan for every scenario. You act, then let go. At first, this may feel reckless, but over time, it builds resilience. You learn that you can handle what comes, not because you controlled it, but because you adapted. You can also soothe the nervous system directly. Breathwork, grounding techniques, gentle movement, all calm the salience network, reducing the impulse to overthink. When your body feels safe, your mind follows. Another powerful practice is surrender journaling. Each evening, write down what you're carrying, the worries, the loops, the imagined futures. Then, at the bottom of the page, write, "I release what I cannot control." This doesn't erase the concern, but it signals your willingness to trust something larger than thought, whether that's time, life, or your own inner wisdom. Remember, trust is not passivity. It is active allowing. It's the choice to live with openness, not because you know the outcome, but because you accept that not knowing is part of being alive. This shift may feel foreign, especially if you were taught that control equals strength, that planning prevents pain. But true strength is adaptive. It bends, feels, grieves, tries again. And true safety does not come from certainty, it comes from presence. Over time, as you loosen the grip on thought as control, something beautiful happens. Space opens, intuition returns. You begin to feel life, not just manage it. You begin to trust your ability to respond, rather than prepare endlessly. In the next section, we'll explore how movement and the body help quiet the overthinking mind, why thinking less often begins with feeling more, and how embodiment restores balance to your inner world. When your mind becomes too loud, your body becomes distant. Overthinking often pulls awareness upward into the head, into abstract loops of prediction, analysis, and self-inquiry. But healing rarely happens through thought alone. It begins when you remember that you are not just a thinker, you are a living, sensing body. This is the medicine of embodiment. The body does not overthink. It does not question, plan, or rehearse. It simply responds. When cold, it shivers. When tired, it signals rest. When safe, it softens. The wisdom of the body is present-centered. It communicates not in words, but in sensation, tension, breath, posture, heartbeat. But in a culture that prizes cognition, this language is often ignored. We're trained to override the body, push through fatigue, distrust instinct, solve emotion instead of feeling it. The result, a mind untethered, trying to manage life alone without the grounding of somatic truth. Yet every thought you have reverberates in the body. Anxiety tightens the chest. Rumination knots the stomach. Worry raises the shoulders. Overthinking is not just a mental pattern, it's a physical experience. And so the antidote begins with reconnection. One of the simplest ways to return to the body is through movement, not for performance or productivity, but for presence. A slow walk, gentle stretching, rocking, swaying, dancing. These movements tell the nervous system, we are here, we are safe. They release accumulated tension and restore flow. Even a few minutes of intentional movement can shift brain activity. The salience network quiets. The prefrontal cortex relaxes. Default mode chatter fades. What you feel, you no longer need to think about. This is embodiment in action. Breath is another doorway. Your breath is both automatic and voluntary. It reflects your state, and it can change it. When you inhale slowly, exhale longer, you signal calm. You invite your body into parasympathetic rest. With each breath, you say, we're okay. Try this. Place one hand on your chest, one on your belly. Inhale gently. Feel your body rise. Exhale slowly. Let the weight of your body be held. Do this not to escape thought, but to anchor your attention below it. Sensory grounding also helps. Tune into your environment. What do you see, hear, smell, feel? Engaging the senses moves attention away from rumination and into experience. You are no longer just in your mind. you are in the world. You can deepen this with touch, warm water, soft textures, pressure points. The body responds to contact. It remembers safety through skin. If you feel disconnected, try placing a hand over your heart or wrapping your arms around yourself. It may feel strange, but the gesture speaks directly to your nervous system. Importantly, learn to ask your body, not just your mind. When making a decision, sit with the options. How does your body react to each one? Tension, relief, numbness? Your cognitive mind may not know, but your body often does. And when overthinking arises, don't just challenge the thought, check the body. Are you tired, hungry, lonely, overstimulated? Many loops begin with unmet needs. Address those, and the mind often quiets naturally. Over time, embodiment becomes not just a practice, but a refuge. You begin to trust that you don't have to think your way out of everything, that your body carries wisdom your mind cannot always access, that stillness and movement are both forms of clarity. You remember that you are not just a brain in a jar. You are a breathing, feeling, dynamic being. And in that remembering, something softens, something realigns. In the next section, we'll explore how storytelling shapes internal experience, how the way you narrate your life can either amplify overthinking or transform it into insight and peace. Your mind is a storyteller. It doesn't just record experiences, it weaves them into meaning. This narrative instinct is powerful. It helps you make sense of your past, anticipate your future, and define who you are. But when the inner storyteller becomes rigid, fearful, or unresolved, it can fuel endless loops of overthinking. This is the role of personal narrative in mental noise. Every day you tell yourself stories about your worth, your relationships, your challenges, your identity. These stories are built from memories, emotions, beliefs, and fragments of interpretation. They're shaped by your upbringing, culture, and the voices you've internalized over time. Often, these narratives run silently in the background, but they shape your thoughts like a current beneath the surface. If the story is, "I always mess up," then every mistake becomes evidence. If the story is, "People leave me," then every silence feels threatening. The mind becomes a confirmation machine, collecting proof for the plot it believes. To change this, you must first become aware of the narrator inside you. This is where overthinking begins to spiral, because when the story is painful or incomplete, the mind replays it, hoping to rewrite, reframe, or resolve. You go over conversations, analyze decisions, imagine alternate endings, but rarely do these loops bring peace. They only deepen the groove of the story. Pause and ask, what story am I telling myself about this situation? Is it a story of failure, rejection, injustice? Often it's not the facts that distress you, but the meaning you've attached to them. Naming the narrative gives you perspective. It allows you to question its accuracy, its origin, and its usefulness. Next, bring compassion to the storyteller. You might discover that the voice in your head isn't cruel, it's scared. It's trying to protect you from disappointment, shame, or loss. It learned its tone from past pain. By meeting it with kindness, you begin to soften its grip. Then, explore reauthoring. Your past is fixed, but your interpretation is not. You can choose new ways to frame your experiences. Instead of "I failed again," try "I learned something I needed." Instead of "they left because I'm unlovable," try "their leaving reflected their journey, not my worth." This doesn't deny pain. It reframes it. It moves you from victimhood to agency, from fixation to growth. Writing can be a powerful tool here. Take a memory that fuels rumination and rewrite it from a compassionate lens. What did your younger self need in that moment? What strengths did you show, even in struggle? What did you survive? Therapy can also be a profound space for narrative repair. Many therapeutic modalities, especially narrative therapy, psychodynamic work, and EMDR, help you explore how your story was formed and how to reshape it in alignment with who you are becoming. Importantly, surround yourself with stories of hope. What you consume shapes your mental language. Books, podcasts, films, choose those that offer complexity, healing, and transformation. These models expand your narrative possibilities. You can also practice daily narrative shifting. Each evening, ask yourself, what story did I tell about today? What's another way to see it? Over time, this builds cognitive flexibility, the ability to hold multiple interpretations, which is essential for reducing overthinking. Because ultimately, overthinking is often a signal that your story needs attention, that a chapter is unresolved, that a belief no longer fits, that your narrator is tired. By tending to the story, not with judgment, but with curiosity, you free your mind from its loops. You allow your inner narrative to evolve. You begin to tell stories that are truer, softer, more whole. And in that, peace returns. In the next and final section, we'll integrate everything we've explored. We'll look at how clarity emerges not from silencing thought, but from listening wisely. How your mind, when heard and honored, becomes an ally in stillness. After all the analysis, exploration, and self-inquiry, the question that quietly lingers is, can the mind ever be still? You've seen how thoughts arise from networks, memories, emotions, beliefs, how they echo the past, anticipate the future, try to protect, prepare. Overthinking is not madness, it's effort. The mind striving to keep you safe in a world that feels uncertain. But at some point, thought itself becomes the source of suffering. And so, the final shift is not in suppressing thought, but in changing your relationship to it. Imagine standing by a river. Thoughts are leaves floating downstream. Some are light and harmless. Others are heavy, jagged. In overthinking, you dive into the river, grab each leaf, analyze it, try to change its shape. But the river never stops, and you end up soaked, tangled, exhausted. Now imagine standing still, watching the leaves pass, noticing them, naming them, a fear, a plan, a memory, and letting them go. You don't stop the river, you simply stop fighting it. This is mental clarity, not the absence of thought, but the presence of awareness. This clarity comes through integration. It means acknowledging that every thought has a source, a network, a need, a narrative, that you are not broken for thinking deeply, that your loops had reasons, but now you choose to respond differently. You no longer believe every thought. You question its tone. You check its alignment with your truth. You ask, is this thought helpful? Is it kind? Is it mine? And if not, you let it pass. You return to the breath, to the body, to the moment. You touch the realness beneath the narrative, the steady ground of now. And from there, thought softens, not silenced, but no longer in control. Clarity also means recentering the self. Overthinking often fragments you into possibilities, regrets, roles, comparisons, but clarity returns you to essence, the part of you that exists before the thought, the witness, the still point, the quiet knowing. This self is not threatened by uncertainty. It does not rush to fix or explain. It listens, it trusts, it waits, and in its presence the mind begins to heal. One way to strengthen this presence is through daily stillness practice, not performance meditation, but simple being. Sit in silence. Notice, let thoughts come and go. Return to your breath. Do this not to succeed, but to remember you are more than your thoughts. Rituals can support this. Light a candle before journaling. Place a hand on your chest before sleep. Sip tea slowly without a screen. These acts tell your nervous system, we are safe, we are here. They anchor clarity in the body, not just the mind. And remember, clarity is not a final state. It's a rhythm, a returning, Some days the mind will race. That's okay. You'll notice. You'll breathe. You'll choose again. Because the opposite of overthinking is not underthinking. It's clear thinking. Thinking that is aligned, kind, necessary. Thinking that serves, not controls. So now, as this exploration comes to rest, let your mind soften. You've travelled deep into its patterns, its fears, its hopes. You've seen how it loops, protects, remembers. And you've seen how, with presence and compassion, those loops can unwind. Trust this. You are not your thoughts. You are the space they move through. And in that space, there is quiet, there is light, there is peace. Let it hold you now. Let everything begin to slow. There's no need to reach for more thoughts. No need to find one last answer. The mind has worked gently and fully. It has explored, revealed, unfolded. Now it can rest. Feel how your body settles with each breath. Let your shoulders ease down a little further. Let your jaw soften. Let your eyes, even if closed, feel unburdened. You are safe here. In this quiet, there is nothing to solve, nothing to prove, no loops to follow. Just the rhythm of breath, just the presence of now. As you sink into this final stretch, imagine your thoughts like clouds in a fading sky, light, slow-moving, untethered. They come, they drift, they disappear into the vastness, and beneath them is you, steady, whole, unmoved. Your mind may still whisper from time to time. That's natural, but you've learnt not to follow every whisper. You know now, awareness is the anchor, and awareness is always within reach. So let the silence deepen, let the stillness unfold. There's nowhere else to be, no task left undone. Just this quiet, just this breath. Let the breath grow longer. Let the spaces between each inhale and exhale widen like the soft opening of a night sky. You are not chasing sleep. You are allowing it to come, like the tide returning to shore, like the leaves settling after the wind. Let the body melt into stillness. Let the mind dim like a fading candle. And as you lie here, remember, peace is not the absence of thought. It is your ability to remain at peace, even as thoughts come and go. You have that now, so rest in it. Let sleep find you. Let the mind dream, not analyze. Let the heart rest, not guard. Let the body renew, not endure. You are safe. You are held. You are home.